Okay, on my last birthday back in May, I got this book from Lili Aranda, and it's the book is Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicist for people in a hurry. I think what he should have named it is For Idiots, but that's just my opinion. And it's an interesting book. I like it. I started reading it, and I don't remember why, but for whatever reason I put it down and went on to other books. But then I had a lot of free time over the summer, so I came back to it. But I had lost my place. I couldn't remember where I was. So what I did, I started reading it from the beginning, and I realized something pretty interesting. Anyways, this is the first line of the book. In the beginning, nearly okay. In the beginning, nearly 14 billion years ago, I need more light. Okay, in the beginning, nearly 14 billion years ago, all the space, all the matter, and all the energy of the known universe was contained in the volume less than 1/1,000,000th of the size of the period that ends this sentence. And I don't know if it'll show up, but it's that little dot. Supposedly the universe, that dot is 1 trillion size bigger than the whole universe 14 billion years ago, which is a very interesting thing to say, and which I disagree with, but I'll get that into that later. Not necessarily disagree, I just think the description is not quite. I'll get into it later. So anyway, so as I'm rereading this book, I'm reading all the notes that I wrote. Like for example, at the end of the sentence, I put maybe, but, meaning that I don't necessarily agree with that. But who am I to disagree with them, right? So anyway, so as I reread the book, I found it interesting to write my notes, what I wrote in place of what they wrote. For example, it says here, conditions were so hot that the basic forces of nature. Anyway, so I underlined forces and I changed it. I never liked the word forces because the four forces of nature, seems to, at least to me, imply something like magical, like there's no reason behind them. So the word that I would use, which I wrote down here, is mechanisms. The four mechanisms. And I know that I'm not very familiar with the other three forces, but I'm very familiar with gravity. And gravity, the way that I would rather describe it, is as a mechanism, not as a force. And I suspect the other three forces, there's also some form of mechanism behind them. So anyway, so I'm rereading this thing and reading my notes. Okay, for example, it says cosmos could only expand. I've always had a problem with that. I'll explain in a little bit. And I underlined the word expand, and I wrote, or causality started to slow down. I'll explain what I mean in a little bit. So anyway, so I'm rereading this whole thing, and I get to the part. Here it is. I get to this part. Anyways, but here at the end, I wrote down the word wow. And for the life of me, I could not remember why I wrote that down. So I read this and reread it and trying to remember why I wrote down the word wow. Well, it turns out that wow, I think, ultimately was a mistake, but it was a very interesting mistake. And that's what I'm fixing to describe. it turns out that wow. So it turns out that wow was referring to an idea that I had a long time ago, because I never liked the way scientists describe the universe as a small point, trillions of times smaller than this dot. Supposedly, at this point of the universe development, there was no time and there was no space. Supposedly, the universe was extremely small, surrounded by nothingness, right? So in my attempts to understand, to get a better, to visualize it better, I imagined that little dot as magnified, not bigger, but just magnified, still extremely small, just magnified so that I could manipulate it, right? So anyway, so what I think they mean by it being extremely small is that causality was instantaneous. In other words, that this side of the universe could affect this side of the universe instantaneously. In other words, no time and no space, you know. And then they go on to describe this little dot as it expanded, right? But still, though, it's surrounded by nothingness. How can you expand into nothingness? That did not make sense to me. So the way I visualized it is that causality started to slow down. In other words, that it would take time for this side of the universe to affect this side of the universe. Imagine being a person here and throwing a rock over here. It will take time to get to the other side, right? But also imagine being a person outside of this. You're supposedly nothingness, so you would not see it grow or get closer to you, because this is nothingness. There is no space or time. So anyways, so I couldn't imagine it growing. So what I imagine is that causality started to slow down, right? The whole point of this idea is to try to understand what they describe using words that don't make sense at this point of the universe development. Okay, that was the whole point. That instead of it being extremely small, causality was instantaneous. That it started to expand, causality started to slow down. It's just I'm using different words to describe what they're describing. Words that I think are more suitable. Okay, that was the whole idea. That was it, right? And so, I had this idea a long time ago. So anyway, so then I'm reading this book, and this is what I read. So I have that idea in my head, and I'm reading this paragraph that precedes the wow word. All the while, the interplay of matter in the form of subatomic particles and energy in the form of photons, massless vessels of light energy that are as much waves as there are particles, was incessant. The universe was hot enough for these photons to spontaneously convert their energy into matter-antimatter particle pairs, which immediately thereafter annihilated, returning their energy back to photons. This transmogrifications are entirely prescribed by Einstein's most famous equation, E equals mc squared, which is a two-way recipe for how much matter your energy is worth and how much energy your matter is worth. The c squared is the speed of light squared, a huge number which, when multiplied by the mass, reminds us how much energy you actually get in this exercise. Me reading this, I realized that what I described, or what I was describing, trying to understand what the scientists described, wasn't just different words. It was a completely different visualization of the Big Bang. because of E equals mc squared. So one of the big breakthroughs of E equals mc squared is that Einstein realized that speed of light was constant. The reason it's represented as a c is because c means constant, meaning unchangeable. The speed of light supposedly is 180,000 miles per second, and supposedly that's a constant, meaning unchangeable. But what I'm describing is that constant is actually a variable from infinity, or starting with infinity, going towards zero. So it's a completely different way of describing. Unbeknownst to me, I was describing something completely different to what they were describing. And obviously I'm wrong, because Einstein's one of his big ideas was that speed of light is constant, meaning unchangeable. I was describing a universe where the speed of light started at infinity and then it started to slow down. The speed of light, 180,000 miles per second, doesn't really refer to the speed of light. It actually refers to the speed of causality. When I said that causality was instantaneous and then started to slow down, I was saying, without realizing it, that Einstein's idea that this was a constant was not. It supposedly wasn't. At least according to my idea, it was not a constant. It was a variable that started from infinity. So in other words, instead of plugging in this number here to get the mass that supposedly should always be the same, you would plug in infinite. Infinite squared is still infinite. Infinite times any number is still infinite. So E, at the stage of the universe where causality was instantaneous, energy was infinite. As it started to slow down, as causality started to slow down, which time and space either emerged or developed, I'm not sure what word to use. Energy will stop being infinite. It was, I don't know what number, but it wasn't infinite no more. In other words, the question to where did all the matter within the universe come from, including space and including time, is it came from causality slowing down. I know I have to be wrong. This can't be a real model of the Big Bang, because I know that one of Einstein's big ideas was that the speed of light is constant. It's 180 miles a second. But I also know that there's a few scientists that think, I have no idea if they're sure or not, but some scientists think that at the moment of the Big Bang, when the universe, the way they would describe it as the universe expanding, that it expanded faster than the speed of light. Well, if you just switch to this view of the universe, that it wasn't expanding, it was just causality slowing down, then it makes a little bit more sense. Supposedly nothing can go faster than causality, faster than the speed of light. Well, as causality is slowing down in the universe, obviously it would be faster than 180,000 miles a second. So what I thought was a simple idea, not even an idea, a simple description of an idea, is actually describing the original idea completely different. I have ideas, assuming that I'm right, I have ideas on top of these ideas. For example,